Good evening, my name is Matt Nathan. This is Educate, Agitate, Organise Saturday, a joint production between Socialist Telly and Don't Leave Organise. I'm joined by my comrade Niamh, who's going to tell us a little bit about what we're trying to do with these programmes.
So really just trying to offer a spotlight for campaigns, to just represents the vibrancy of the working class struggle and labour movement. So no campaign is too small or too big. So please get in touch. If you have a campaign that you would like to share with us and others, please let us know.
Well, Nadia, tonight we've got a really diverse panel. We've got a couple of people from the Orgreave Truth and Justice Campaign. We got one of the founders of Lesbian and Gay Supporting the Miners, and we have someone from the student movement who was inspired by that struggle. So really looking forward to hearing what you think about the discussion that we had. So without further ado, this is a slightly longer episode than normal. Shall we just go straight to our speakers?
Yes.
Tonight, I'm really privileged to be joined by Kate Flannery, who is Secretary of the Orgreave Truth and Justice Campaign, Chris Peace, who, alongside being a prominent activist for that campaign, was also the Labour Party candidate for North East Derbyshire, Niamh Flannery, who is a student activist who's been inspired by the Orgreave Truth and Justice Campaign, as well as being involved herself, and last but by no means least, Mike Jackson, who is co-founder of Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners.
Hiya.
Great to be here. Great to be here. Thanks for asking us, Matt.
So look, before we get into the discussion, and there is a lot to discuss, I think we're going to be sort of, covering quite a lot of ground here. Chris, for the benefit of people who perhaps don't know the history, do you want to maybe just give us a quick overview of what happened at Orgreave and why it's so important?
Yes, I mean, Orgreave was a coking plant just outside of Sheffield, and it became a key location during the 1984-85 miners' strike. It wasn't the only incident of violence. There was violence at the hands of what was really a state-controlled police at that time across the country and in mining communities. But there was one particular day at Orgreave, which was unprecedented, really, in the use of violence. It meant miners experienced on that day a different kind of policing at its full force. So this was a highly trained, militarised policing, and there was thousands of miners who had gathered at Orgreave, and there was thousands and thousands of police who welcomed there that day. It was quite a different day for the miners. When you speak to people who were there, they say it's very different on that day. Instead of having to argue your way through roadblocks or being turned around, trying to go to locations to picket, this day you were welcomed in, you were ushered in almost, and there was a location around. It was a big, massive cornfield, basically, and the miners were all led there. It's really like an early form of cattling because they were surrounded by mounted police with dogs, a very, very vast, deep line of police with lawn shields. And basically, when the signal was given, that parted and the mounted police came through. They had long batons and people just had to run for their lives, basically. And then they were pursued by a kind of team of police with short shields and short batons who basically came and were attacking from behind, head on as well, miners, causing very serious injuries to them. This was all unprovoked. There was always a bit of a ritual push and a shove, but the level of violence used by the police was so disproportionate. It was really to send a message during a strike, which was actually gaining and doing well, to basically try and knock the spirit out of the strike. And as well as that, causing, as I say, very serious injuries to comrades.
And would it be fair to say that was the conditions for that were created by a process of demonisation on the part of press and, of course, that Tory government of those mining communities? an unforeseen consequence of that, of course, that demonisation, was solidarity. Mike, I wonder if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, we were, ordinary lesbians and gays. The LGBT acronym wasn't existent then. This is kind of going back to prehistory now. And quite a lot of the people who came together to form Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners were actually the majority were working class people who originated from kind of working class communities. I originated from a small town in Lancashire. There was a long history of coal mining, cotton weaving mills, textile machinery manufacturers. Now, we'd all migrated to London because life was a lot easier for young lesbian and gay people living in London, obviously. But one never forgets one's roots, and to support the miners was just a normal, natural thing that you would do. One of the interesting things that's happened since Pride came out is people have this habit of kind of characterising lesbians and gays here and miners and mining communities there, as if we were two separate communities. Do you know what I mean? And that's just ridiculous. Do you know what I mean? We're all part of the working class if we believe in class and class struggle. So it was quite natural for us to support the miners. And yes, we were a little bit trepidatious that we might come across homophobia. The miners weren't at the zeitgeist of sexuality and women's liberation, etc., etc. I mean, indeed, the newspaper, The Miners, still had a page 3 girl in it at the beginning of the strike. But interestingly enough, one of the things that changed during the strike pretty rapidly was the women went, "Oi, get rid of that," and they did. But in fact, we didn't meet any homophobia. All we met was acceptance and curiosity. And well, I don't need to tell you this story because you see the story in the movie Pride. Yeah,
and that sort of, I guess, is it curiosity, Niamh? I'm really interested because obviously you're a really active campaigner in the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, but it's something that happened before you were born. I hope you don't mind me saying. So, what is it that drew you to that particular campaign and sort of inspired you to get involved?
Well, because my mum was part of the campaign anyway, and I was learning a lot about the miners' strike through a lot of the work that she was doing and all her comrades. And in 2015, during LGBTQ plus History Month, I saw Pride for the first time, and it really touched my heart because I didn't know a lot about the miners' strike then, and I barely knew anything about LGSM back then. So that film really made me learn about activism and the solidarity between these two political and social organisations, and how they were learning from each other, and as Mike touched on, it was working class solidarity and also solidarity relating to the miners' strike and how they all, because with LGSM and the miners who were striking, is they were both going through struggles of their own, and they were both relating to each other by working together. And it was interesting for me to see that sort of intersectionality on how people having different struggles can work together politically, to improve society and to educate people. So that's how my activism started, and I was getting really involved in the Orgreave Campaign. And I did a project for A-level by doing interviews with ex-miners, and I also did interviews with LGSM as well, just to create some sort of framework on how they were active back in the 1984/5 miners' strike. And it's really helped me become really active today because I'm a student activist currently. I'm active in a rent strike in London, which is, of course, quite remote now because of the coronavirus. But even that has, the activism that you learn, and you learn from all these amazing people, just really pushes you to be active yourself. So it's been really great to learn a lot of historical activism and solidarity.
That's really great to hear. Thank you, Niamh. And Kate, I wonder if you could sort of tell us a bit about the work of the campaign today, now that we understand the history and the solidarity around it.
Well, we set up as a campaign initially at the end of 2012, but after the miners' strike, there were calls, after Orgreave, for an inquiry into what had happened at Orgreave. The NUM and various members of Parliament were trying to push for some kind of inquiry. And in, I think it was 1991, Dennis Skinner put an early day motion into Parliament about there being some kind of Orgreave inquiry and an inquiry into the miners' strike. So after the Hillsborough panel outcome in 2012, the Orgreave campaign was set up by a group of individuals who were keen to look again at what had been happening during the strike and how that was impacting still on people's lives and on society now. And the campaign really was a campaign established, set up for a public inquiry. As times rolled on, and we've had various Tory Home Secretaries who've rejected any bid for a public inquiry, we're still campaigning for a public inquiry or some kind of inquiry. We've seen the Scottish Miners' Review outcome. We know about what's happened in relation to potential pardons for miners who were on strike in France in the 40s and 50s. The campaign is about kind of galvanising people together, getting involved with other justice campaigns. Even though we experience rejection regularly, we still carry on regardless. We even got the Bishop of Sheffield wanting to meet with us because he was keen to push for an actual Orgreave independent panel. He'd been involved in the periphery, I suppose, of the Hillsborough independent panel and was keen to see something happen in relation to Orgreave, and the Tories even rejected that. So, but I think one of the great things about the campaign is we've got an incredibly active core group of individuals who are just so incredibly conscientious and really great comrades and do a lot on social media. We're constantly speaking at meetings. We're supporting other justice campaigns and other political causes. So we've got this really kind of active social media presence, which is quite important, as you know, during the last year. But we also do things. We go on demos. We organise our own events. We have an annual Orgreave rally commemorating the 18th of June. We attend Durham. We organise our own sort of cultural events and activities. And it was meeting up with Mike and comrades again in 2015 at the event that Niamh made reference to, another event that I was involved in organising as the Secretary of the Friends of Edward Carpenter for LGBTQ plus History Month, that we were starting to develop the whole thing about how we campaign on more things that we have in common than the things that divide us. And I think that's been really great because it's sort of made us bond as friends as well as political activists and comrades. So there's been that great sort of joint activism of people and meeting new friends, as Di Donovan made reference to in the Pride film about friends we've not yet met. So there's this whole thing about, the sort of camaraderie and doing stuff, as Niamh was saying earlier on, doing stuff as a group, doing things together. I don't think, Chris might be able to come in on this bit. I don't think there's much we haven't done as a campaign. We've organised conferences, we've been to gigs, we've got musicians involved. It's been a really fantastic campaign, and it continues to be so. We sell merchandise to fundraise for all our activities. Is there anything else, Chris, that we...
Oh, yeah, it's Kate's described a very busy, active life, what we lead, and, and some of us work full time as well, so I don't quite know how we fit it all in. But I think crucially, The push for that scrutiny of what happened at Orgreave and how it fitted into the Tories' agenda of that time. On that, we have done a huge amount of raising of awareness, and it is great to have like a really active young wing of Orgreave activists. But, importantly, we don't just ask nicely to the many Tory secretaries we've had to deal with. We put in a very detailed legal submission, which was a real labour of love, toil and solidarity, and had contributions from many ex-miners who were involved at Orgreave directly. And that was a lengthy, substantive, unarguable piece of work that the Tories basically ignored. We've also, we changed Labour Party policy. So at the beginning of the campaign, it wasn't Labour Party policy to have an inquiry into Orgreave. And to be quite honest, it was hard work making some Labour MPs listen. We had others who have been always on the side of our class and on the miners from the beginning. But working and meeting with people within the Labour Party, we did get that as a manifesto promise back in 2016. It was in the 2017 manifesto. It was in the 2019 manifesto, and we've been told it is still and will continue to be Labour Party policy to order some kind of inquiry. Now, this came from, as Kate said, a relatively small campaign, but one which has got ripples out to so many different groups of people who recognise that what happened on that one day back in 1984 is directly connected to what is happening in Tory Britain in the 21st century. So it's not something in the past, it's not history, that doesn't matter. People and the work of the campaign, with the support we've had, has built that. I mean, a piece of work we did very recently with other justice campaigns, so Justice for Grenfell, Shrewsbury, the official Shrewsbury campaign, Spy Cops campaign, Blacklisting and Hills for Justice campaign. We put in our objections to the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Bill, a despicable piece of legislation that the Tories have pushed through, which will directly impact on trade union and campaigning activities. We produced a briefing on that. All of these things are on our website, so please go to otjc.org.uk. So that's, just to add to that long list of things what Kate said, it's a busy life in the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. But
it's a really important understanding of sort of connections with other campaigns there and consequences of Orgreave and all the rest of it. I'd be really interested. Mike, I wonder if you can you can come in on this one. Chris just mentioned some of the Labour MPs who took a while to come over to your position. I wonder if you could talk a bit about how did you change people's minds on the periphery of this stuff?
Well, if I understand you correctly, I mean, back in the 70s and 80s when we were young LGBT campaigners, the big thing then was to come out. And that wasn't only just about something that's of personal value to self, which is enormously important for your own self-respect and self-esteem. But just as important was the effect it had on the people around you, because time after time after time, I found people who just never had met out gay people before. Every gay person that they'd ever met was too timid, perhaps, or scared to declare their sexuality in any way. And so what our experience was, in the vast majority of the cases, once you started to talk to people, I'm talking about non-LGBT people, their prejudices would just kind of melt away because there was such a dissonance between the caricature of a gay man, say, and the reality. And having heard it from the reality from a gay person who's speaking to me right now, they just realised it was a lot of nonsense. And that's why when we went down to Wales that first time, we weren't particularly worried about it, because if we were going to come across that kind of attitude, we were dealing with that every day of our lives. We were already activists. So we'd welcome, if anything, the opportunity to, talk about LGBT stuff. And my God, getting drunk at the Miners' Welfare that first Saturday night, did they ask us questions? we got down and dirty with the questions they're asking, which is great. Do you know what I mean? Wonderful. They were more or less saying, look, we're being demonised by the state, by the media. We can see how you're demonised. So tell us the truth. Let's get it all out and talk about it. And they did. It was fabulous. I'll not repeat what was questions that were asked for me now. I don't know, but it was great.
Watershed. So I think that in a lot of popular culture, sort of coming out is portrayed as, and obviously it is like a deeply personal, individual thing. But the way you describe it there, it's an act of solidarity as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's an act of solidarity with all gay people. And in a sense, for me, as a socialist and somebody who's got class consciousness, it's saying to my hitherto ignorant working class brother, I am you, you are me, we're both working class. And that is that, it's of so much significance, really, what my sexuality is. And invariably, they kind of go, yeah. And all my life, and I'm sure most gay people will tell you this, the only ones who were not persuaded after that, a tiny, tiny number of people who remain toxically homophobic. I've never met a single one of those men where I've not gone, Because, if you're happy with your sexuality as a heterosexual man, what on earth would a gay man's sexuality impact on you for? It doesn't make any sense. All my straight mates don't give a damn about my sexuality, and they don't even think about it any more than I do about theirs. It's just like, oh, he's got glasses, she's got red hair, and he's gay. It's like just so inconsequential. I mean, I'm rambling away from the point here. I mean, the thing is about the miners' strike, it was all about the state and the media and the entire class apparatus used in its most powerful form to destroy the miners. And, there's times gone by now, I just see the British miners' strike as global significance, because the first rollout of neoliberalism was done in Chile by General Pinochet during the murderous coup against Allende's democratically elected Marxist government. So that was neoliberalism rolled out, at the end of a gun. And the second country in the world to try that project was Britain, with Thatcher. And Thatcher knew exactly what she was doing. This was not just going to be a victory for British capital versus the British working class. This was going to be a global coup, because if they could manage it in Britain, they will then roll that out around the world. And that's exactly what happened. So the forces of capital around the world were amassed behind the Thatcher government as well. And before I forget, the thing about the policing of the strike, the late odious Thatcher minister, Leon Britton, declared publicly was the effect of the policing of the miners' strike must never, ever get into the public domain. Says it all, doesn't it? Why won't the Tories have a public inquiry about Orgreave? We know damn well why. Because the truth will come out. They demonise the miners as brutes, as the enemy within, but the real brutes were the British police force.
And there is a very sort of persuasive school of thought that it was such a militarised, well, you used the word militarised police, Chris, didn't you? It's such a brutal crackdown on a very well organised, very class conscious community And I mean, is there any hope for us in the modern day? I mean,
Well,
what can we learn from that? And that was a loss, you know.
Yeah,
ago.
I think the kind of the end product in 1985. We've touched on, which is the world that we're in now. But we must remember that there was a criminal trial at Sheffield Crown Court where 95 miners who were charged with riot and unlawful assembly went on trial. And after 48 days of police officer after police officer giving evidence, which was just fell apart under cross-examination, the prosecution realised that they simply did not have a case. They didn't have a case because the evidence wasn't there in the first place. It had all been manufactured. And those miners, so they 95 charged, as I say, they put the first 15 on trial. The prosecution on the 48th day went into court and offered no evidence and said, that's it, we've got no case. And the judge marked the cases all dismissed, which is an acquittal for all those miners. Mm. We all know what happened in that day, but it doesn't get out there and people don't dwell on the fact those miners have been through a process. The government has been through process in a criminal court and there were no cases to answer. So that's very important. The other thing that's important is, whilst we have managed to get files and documents released that have never seen the light of day, as Mike touched on, the Tories don't want this to be looked at. We have found, this is, if you have any concerns about state control, hiding facts, then, we found out that there are police documents, files relating to the miners' strike that are up in Hull University Library, embargoed until 2066. Not in the public domain until 2066. There's no equivalent. I can't find anything similar where papers relating to an industrial action and the policing of it are so dangerous, so inflammatory that they have to be hidden away from us until 2066.
I think Chris has hit on something there in relation to how the media operate and operated and always have operated. I mean, when I made reference to Edward Carpenter, who eventually became a peace activist during the First World War. He was a gay socialist who lived in Sheffield and was quite a key socialist campaigner. The police were up to the same thing in those days. I mean, we hear about what Churchill did to the miners and how the press have kept a lid on all that. We hear about Churchill's role in the Middle East. But a lot of people don't know about most of these things. And one of the incidents in relation to Orgreave was how the BBC had reversed the footage. It implied that it was the miners that were violent, not miners who were trying to defend themselves against violence, but it was the miners that were violent, according to the BBC. And when it all came out that they'd misrepresented what had actually happened that day, they kind of made out that it was a mistake and the footage somehow had got reversed. And we as part of our work, we have a lot of contact with the media. We're constantly writing our own articles for various journals that we try and get published. We send letters off to various newspapers. We're regularly issuing media releases and offering ourselves up for interviews, and rarely do the media respond to us. We have a real problem in this country about how the media responds to any fight back that we have. And I think what's also interesting about history, we talked about Edward Carpenter as being a man ahead of his time. Well, in some ways, he wasn't a man ahead of his time. He was a man of his time. Gayness wasn't invented in the early 1900s, and Oscar Wilde went on trial But he only really went on trial because his lover's father hated him and was determined to make an example of him. Lots of other LGBTQ people were living very full and enriched lives amongst friends who really supported them and were real activists in the socialist movement and the feminist movement in those days. So the early 1900s were a real hotbed of real revolutionary activity and socialist activity that this state put the absolute lid on, because it was scared stiff that we were going to end up like what was going on in Russia. You know, they didn't want that to happen to Tory imperialist Britain. And so we've had fight backs years and years and years, but the media have really, really kept an absolute lid on it just to ensure that nobody knows what's really going on.
And I think in a lot of ways, it's fair to say that the media it's got worse as time has gone on, hasn't it?
It seems to have. I'm not sure it has. We just have that perception that it has, because it keeps reminding us that it's as bad as it always was.
Well, I wonder if, I mean, Niamh, you're a sort of younger than me anyway, activist. And, so I think it's always interesting to get the perspectives of younger people on the media landscape. I mean, I can just about remember a world without the internet, but obviously you've sort of grown up in that world. What impact do you think the media has on activism?
Well, nowadays, especially with social media, we have algorithms. Sorry, I can say that. So we often see what we want to see, and a lot of the time we have to make the sort of autonomous choice to look into media that we wouldn't normally look at, and look at the other picture. So when you look at a lot of right-wing media, you know, you can see how it's designed to brainwash people into thinking a certain way and to, you know, scapegoat certain social groups, political groups. And you even see it in, you see it online, you even see it in the supposedly liberal newspapers. And you notice how a lot of campaign groups don't get a lot of publicity. So, for example, you don't hear about the strikes that have been happening in India. You don't hear much about the student strikes, the rent strikes, etc., which are the most, the biggest strike ever since, in 40 years, since the 1968 protest students. So, by comparing the media back during the miners' strike and comparing it to today, there's not a lot that's really changed. Like people, you see certain groups that are demonized, like they were demonized back in 1984. I mean, the font might have changed a bit, the way the literature might have changed a bit, but all in all, the way the media works hasn't changed, and it's still there to scapegoat and demonize certain groups in society. And yeah, that's something.
It's interesting you mentioned the sort of talking about the bubbles that social media creates, because I think you could probably argue something that Mike and his comrades did incredibly successfully was sort of breaking out of a bubble, wasn't it? And and showing that solidarity very successfully. I'm just looking back. If you had your time again, Mike, is there something you would have done differently? Do you think there was any way you could have changed the sort of direction of that whole series of struggles?
Blimey, that's a big ask. Perhaps I personally wish I'd been a bit more disciplined and read a bit more and in terms of political engagement. But I had a job to do, and I had a life to live. I'm just going back to your question to us a few minutes ago, Matt, about it's all a bit gloomy. Have we, your generation, any future? Of course you have. Tony Benn always said 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We will never win completely, but we'll never lose completely. And that's a good bit of advice. I mean, I'm an old git now, I'm 66. And it's just amazing. I'm still fighting the same bloody things that I was when I was in my 20s. And they're predictable. Housing, wars, the health service, education, it's just the same stuff because the Tories are still there. They're still around. But there is something very significantly different now, and that's the climate emergency. I mean, that is like nothing else ever in history. So it may not appear to, but, you know, we are exponentially accelerating politically towards something, and the outcome, I have no idea. It could be barbarism or it could be socialism. The one thing I don't think it could possibly be will be capitalism. I cannot think how on earth a capitalist can imagine that they can genuinely use capitalism to bring about, you know, controlling the climate emergency. They will, because what's so marvelous about these people, they just think of so many bullshit ways to do stuff, you know. And they did. I mean, in the early days, there was, do you remember carbon trading and carbon neutral? That seems to have gone now. I mean, how absolutely absurd. I'll carry on polluting over there, but I'll plant some trees. That'll be nice, won't it? And everything will be right then. So, you know, carte blanche to carry on, you know, disastrously knackering the climate, and plant a few ash trees somewhere. That'll work, won't it? And carbon trading, you know, capitalism, it will make a buck out of anything. I'm amazed that they haven't got little like iPads on the inside lids of coffins so that you can spend eternity watching things being sold to you. Do you know what I mean? It's like Karl Marx said, you know, the productive capacity of capitalism is something, more or less said, it's something to behold. And it's true. The only trouble is there is no place for it in terms of, you know, avoiding a climate catastrophe. We have to do that collectively. I thought it was very interesting that Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson said at the early parts of the pandemic, there is such a thing as society. And that was a real rebuttal to Thatcher's famous quote saying that there's no such thing as society. And the only way that we'll tackle climate change is to do it collectively, socialistically, with all the values that the Labour movement has held dear to itself about equality and fairness and democracy. That's the only solution to climate change. You know, we've got to have all that right. And the Orgreave Campaign really is part of that, because it's about justice. It's about political justice. And, you know, when we do get that public inquiry, we'll then have the truth, and we'll realise that the state has to be controlled by the people, not the other way around. We are the citizens, we come first. Politicians are elected by us to serve us, not the other way around. Rant.
I mean, I think really great points there, and I think also you touched on something that Kate touched on earlier, which is, I mean, it's really important as like an activist, as an organiser, as a campaigner, to have that fire in your belly. But I think what a lot of people underestimate is the importance of stamina. And I think the fact that you've been allies for so long. I mean, it's a long. I had the privilege of talking to a comrade from the Free Mandela campaign, and you know, I said to her, what can you tell me about that? And she said the most important thing is patience. These things take a long time. So I wonder, just sort of, I think coming to an end there, it's been really, really great speaking with you. I wonder if we could just finish on your thoughts on what are some of the other great qualities that are necessary to be a campaigner or an activist. Chris?
Yeah, staying there, you know, keeping going. It's not, you rarely get achievement after a few things. We've all been involved in short campaigns, but something that's trying to shine a light on historic working class injustice. is very difficult. But take inspiration from when comrades have their breakthroughs. So, we took inspiration from the Hillsborough families' struggle that got this campaign going in the first place, and their achievements. We look at what Shrewsbury 24 have achieved. They are eventually back in the Court of Appeal for things that happened in the early 70s. Take your inspiration from others, and any victory, however small, shout loud about it, because nobody else will. This, touching on the media, and I think Niamh just summed it up brilliantly in her contribution. But, programmes like this, what you're doing, and getting that out there, this is important that we support and shout loud, because we have got everything stacked against us. But, take inspiration from others, and be prepared for it to be a hard struggle, dark achievement along the way.
Kate?
Well, I think Chris has hit the nail on the head in relation to this kind of event. I mean, it's just really great, Matt, that you've instigated this and got us involved in talking about how we all work together and how much stamina we need. But we have done a lot of this over the last year, more so, and it will continue, obviously. But also in terms of staying power, we need to have some enjoyment and some fun. And I think that's what we've been really good at in the Orgreave campaign. We've got a group of incredibly conscientious individuals who thankfully know how to have a good time. We meet on demos, and we have some lovely times together, drinks afterwards. We've been away for weekends. Durham springs to mind as one of the great occasions. And you can have enjoyment and have influence at the same time. I think often if you can draw people in, particularly young people, I mean, we do spend a lot of our lives in meetings, don't we? And a lot of that can be really, really quite tedious. So getting involved in stunts and activities, which I think we've been quite good at. We've got some brilliant organisers who are great trade union organisers who... Joe Rollins springs to mind, who've done some fantastic things. I mean, we met up at a social distance in London not long ago with our massive banner outside the Home Office. It was an incredibly enjoyable occasion, and we got some great photos and interviews, and it's inspirational, really. It gives us all a bit of an injection, not a vaccination, an injection of enjoyment and getting in there, getting your sleeves rolled up, and getting involved in everything together. But thanks for this event. It's really good.
And Niamh?
I think as a young person, I definitely recommend just looking into political and social history, and that makes you learn on how to do better as an activist, and learn how to how your escalations go, how you can learn from each other with other campaigns that you join into. And again, from what Kate said, you need to learn to have a good time, because it is really tough, because you're not necessarily going to get the result that you want, but that's why you have to carry on and keep up the good fight, and make sure that you have a good time while you're doing that, because it is really hard work, and it can be quite demoralizing when you don't get the end result that you want. But the point is to just keep going, enjoy yourself, because I think that's what activism is about, predominantly, because you're learning from other people, you're signing yourself up to do really, really great things with other people, and protest works, strikes can work as well, and getting loads of numbers, getting events organised and stuff. Like, it's just a very amazing thing. And LGSM and Orgreave are great examples of that sort of thing with events. And Yeah, it's definitely hard, but it's definitely something to enjoy, and it's definitely hard work that will pay off eventually. So that's what I'm gonna leave there.
And it's good to know that there's young people taking up the struggle as well. Mike, do you have any final words on advice for activists?
All it takes for a movement is two people. Number one. Yeah, you can't do a movement on your own. That's not possible. All you need is one other person. And it's about the fight itself. It's not about the outcome of the fight. I mean, after the big 84, 85 miners' strike, there was a 92, 93 struggle for the remaining 31 pits that the Tories wanted to close under John Major. I threw myself into that campaign. I knew absolutely that we weren't going to win. We hadn't won the big miners' strike 8 years ago, and we were certainly not going to win this particular protest. Did it stop me? Did it buggery? I threw myself into that, because anything you can do to get under the skin of the Tories and keep them annoyed and make them fight as well and delay things and everything, that'll do for me. Like I say, it's not the winning, it's the taking part, really. And certainly, when you get older, you can say to yourself with a great deal of comfort, well, at least I fought, at least we were there. Yeah. So yeah, don't worry about the outcome of the struggle. If you think the struggle is just go for it, and then get drunk afterwards.
And that fight and that struggle, that'll inspire other people, other excellent people all around the world. And that's how we grow, and that's how we win. Listen, that's been really inspiring speaking with you. I wish we had more time. I hope we can do a part 2 one day. It would be really great as well. I know we mentioned him a little bit, but I'd love to find out more about Edward Carpenter. I think he's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
But thank you for being with us this evening, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with your project as well, Matt.
So, really pleased again to have such a really great and diverse set of speakers there. I know that was a little bit longer than usual. I would have liked to have gone on longer. I think we'll definitely have to have some of those individuals back on their own if they'll come back. I mean, that'd be really great. I would have liked to have gone into Edward Carpenter. I really want to find out about the activism that Niamh's doing around the student rent strikes. I could talk to Mike for hours. Kate and Chris, obviously, so much insight and knowledge. Be really great to have any of them back. I mean, what's your main sort of? I like the way each time we do one of these, Nadia, there's a real key sort of take home, isn't there? I think the first one we did, it was all about how community organising and trade unionism don't have to be separate things. They can really work hand in hand. I mean, last week we had, even though it was about Green New Deal, really it was about how important democratic structures and grassroots voice are. I mean, what was your key take home from this week?
So, I mean, obviously, as you know, I'm an Orgreave Truth and Justice activist, actually. And so it was always going to be a special show for me. But I think it's about our working class solidarity, isn't it, in all of our diversity. And it's about those historical injustices that bind us, even to this day, because, obviously Orgreave was 37 years ago, 1984, it's a long time. But, when we were hearing from Mike, even right down to, Niamh, how that historical history still matters today, and how those lessons and those historical lessons that we've learned still inspire young activists today to fight the cause. So it's just really special. As a Sheffielder, I grew up living only 2 miles away from Orgreave. And I hadn't seen the film Pride until a few years back, and it was just amazing, just to see that solidarity. And Mike talked about, the commonality between the miners and the gay community, and how they'd all been demonised at that point in time in history, that brought them together because we are each other. So yeah, it was working class solidarity in all of its diversity. I think it was just that really came out for me a lot within the show.
And we should point out as well, go and check out the Orgreave Truth and Justice Twitter. They put something out a couple of days ago as of recording, so you might have to scroll through their timeline, but that's okay, it's worth doing anyway. But there was a bit of historical footage, and it was the Black Solidarity Trade Union movement and their solidarity with the miners. So it's not just about lesbians and gays supporting the miners, but it's the working class, as you say, in all that diversity. And I think it really needs to be said as well, it's not just about learning from that struggle and the inspiration of that struggle, but also just, so you grew up 2 miles away from Orgreave. I'm sitting 2 miles away from where last summer there was a mounted police baton charge against Black Lives Matter demonstrators.
Yeah.
And that, that historic injustice around Orgreave, there is a direct line between that and that happening.
Yeah. I do remember watching the footage of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and seeing that police charge, and it took me right back to what happened at Orgreave. It was exactly the same. And one of the things that Orgreave has really been trying to get the Home secretaries to look at is, there are methods of policing that haven't changed. And, despite the Home Secretary saying there is nothing to learn and that's why they won't give an inquiry into Orgreave, there absolutely is. 37 years on, the same policing tactics that Chris talked about. Chris talked about, the long shields and the kettling. And we saw that last summer here in our streets in London, in Whitehall. So nothing has changed. There have been no lessons that have been learned when the state works against our class.
And I think another really important thing as well, and Kate touched on this bit, and I think Mike did as well, and it's my friend who's sadly no longer with us, David Graeber. He talks a lot about how it's really important to look after each other. Activist burnout is a real thing, and we all see it and we all kind of experience it. I think a lot of us on the left experienced it over the last 12, 18 months, and it's been a grueling set of years for many of us. And so I think that that's what solidarity is as well. It's not just sort of standing together because of our class consciousness and the politics. Of course, that's really important, but it's looking after each other. I mean, every movement needs nurses, and that doesn't mean putting bandages on. It means looking after each other's well-being. That's really important for our long-term success, I think.
And I think we get that dose of socialism, don't we? That injection in our blood, we've got that from all of the things that we do that are fun outside of the picket lines that we stand on. I think Kate talked about Durham, and I went with the Orgreave Truth and Justice, met up with them at the last Durham Miners Gala that we could get to, and actually walked around with the flag, and just the solidarity that you get from there. It's just such a buzz, and I can absolutely tell you that the Orgreave Truth and Justice Zoom pubs that we've had throughout the pandemic are definitely not to be missed. We've had quizzes, but just the history that they bring around sort of like music and poetry. All of that gets included when you're involved with an Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, and they do they did an online rally last year that me and some others helped organise, and it was all about, again, all of that diversity of our class, and it includes arts, it includes music, and it includes having fun together, which is brilliant.
Bread and roses.
Red and roses.
And of course, then, really great to have the contribution from Niamh, and we'll put some links up. Please do go and find out more about the student strikes around rent. We really hope to have some representatives from those campaigns on really soon. Of course, support everything that Orgreave Truth and Justice are doing. Go to the Lesbians and Gay the Miners website. There's loads of excellent history on there.
You can also support the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign by asking them to send a speaker to your trade union meeting or CLP meeting. We'll put links in the description. Reach out to them. They would love to come and talk to your meeting, and you've got the opportunity then to ask them questions and all the rest of it.
Nadia, do you have any closing thoughts?
These are the things that inspire us to fight. You know, it might feel 37 years ago, why does it still matter? It was a turning point in our working class history. You know, Thatcher was trying to smash our class, and that's why it's so important. And that's why we all must fight to ensure that those 95 miners on Orgreave at that, you know, in June on that day, get the justice that they deserve.
So there you go. As Mike said, go and find one other person and then join the class struggle. And most importantly, don't go gentle into that good night. Watch Educate, Agitate, Organise every Saturday night. Good night, and we'll see you next week.